episode 28.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. You must be prepared to ignite.
Struggling to get your business online? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. Now, here's your hosts, Michael and Teresa Blaze.
Welcome to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. I'm Michael, and I'm here with my wife and business partner, Teresa.
Good evening, everybody.
And how are you doing, Teresa?
You know, I'm a little tired, but I'm doing okay.
So I hope you guys have been enjoying the interviews. So far, we've interviewed John Lee Dumas, Michael Babcock, and Josh Elridge.
And this one, I think, will strike home with those of you that podcast. If you podcast and you decide you want to find a guest for your show, let me ask you this. How difficult is it?
Oh, it's challenging.
Or here's another one for you. How fun is it to actually become a guest on someone else's show? I mean, trying to set all this up and do everything you need to do. Well, I went out and I found someone who I think might be able to help with that.
And we're talking about Jessica Rhodes. Jessica is the founder and CEO of InterviewConnections.com, the premier guest booking agency for podcasters and guest experts. She's also the acclaimed author of Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic. Jessica is the host of Interview Connections TV. Each week, she helps her viewers rock the podcast from both sides of the mic. She co-hosts 3 different podcasts, Roads to Success, The Podcast Producers, and The Parenting Roads. The Podcast Producers was selected by Apple as a how-to podcast show in iTunes and has also been included in the syllabus for a course about podcasting and audio journalism at Western University in Ontario, Canada. Jessica has been a speaker at Podcast Movement, Podcast.us, and Dream Business Academy. She lives in Rhode Island with her husband and 2 kids. So with no further ado, Jessica Rhodes.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you both.
And we're glad to have you. So, you run a site called Interview Connections, and you run podcasts, and you help people get on podcasts, so on and so forth. Now, our audience is small business owners, entrepreneurs, podcasters, so on and so forth. My first question is, why should they even look at, because if they run a podcast, let's say they run a podcast, why should they consider being interviewed, and why should they have interviews on their show?
Great question. You know, I have seen that the biggest benefit that entrepreneurs and small business owners get from podcasting, both as a guest on other shows and then hosting their own show, is with the relationships and the connections that they make along the way. On a personal level, some of my best friends today are people that I met podcasting. And then on a business level, so you can get so many clients and referrals and joint venture partners from podcast interviews. So let's talk about the host side of the mic. You are now able to get on the horn with people that you wouldn't have been able to just have a 30-minute conversation with otherwise. But as a podcast host, you're able to connect with people and interview people. And a lot of times, you know, you can always get these free coaching calls. Like I remember I interviewed my client, Todd Tressiter, and Todd his website is financialmentor.com. And, you know, I'm interviewing him about his expertise. And then, you know, at one point I'm like, so let's just say there's a young couple. They've got 2 little kids. They've got student loan. And I just asked him a question that was totally my situation, and I wanted to get his input. And it was great because it gave him an opportunity to promote his expertise, but I was getting like real life coaching and guidance from him about like becoming financially free by the age of 35, which is what he did. And I'll be 29 actually in a couple of days. My birthday's this week, tomorrow. And so
happy pre-birthday to you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I was like, all right. At the time I was like 27 or 28 when I interviewed him because it was like a year or 2 ago. And so I'm thinking, all right, financially free by 35. I got some time. I could totally do it. So I got basically free advice. If I did not have a podcast, if Todd was not my client, I couldn't just call him and be like, hey, how do I do this? Because he'd be like, okay, well, you could pay me to coach you. So it's great. You can get a lot of value from that. And then as a guest, when you go on other podcasts, you're getting exposure to new audiences. So you both have a podcast, right? I assume you want to grow your audience. When you go on other shows as a guest, you're getting in front of people who already listen to podcasts. So that's first. It's been really interesting. I produce a show with Corey Coates called The Podcast Producers. And in this season, we're talking with listeners. We're going, I was in New York City this past weekend talking with people on the street. We're going to Chicago in a couple of days, and we're just asking regular people about their listening habits. And, people are hearing about like the podcasts they listen to, they're discovering them by recommendations from friends. So when you go on another podcast, that's like a recommendation from a friend, the friend being the host of the show. So if I'm listening to a podcast every week and I really like the guest, and I'm likely to then go subscribe to their podcast because I want more of them.
That's for sure. We experienced that ourselves last week, actually. We could not pay to have a conversation with John Lee Dumas, but because of the fact we interviewed him, here we are sitting with him and talking with him one-on-one. And it was amazing what he put out, and being able to ask some personal questions and stuff. It was great.
Yeah, and it's just really fun too, right? Just being able to connect and build relationships.
This is my favorite part of my business, of our business. Yeah. We're business consultants by trade. We work with small business owners. We build websites for clients and so forth. But this is my favorite part, is just talking and consulting and learning and suggesting and stuff, so forth.
Well, okay, so then here's the question I have, because I'm the one that's usually handling setting up the podcast interviews. Well, mostly, unless, they contact Mike, then he handles it. But for the most part, I'm the one trying to reach out. How would you, as a podcast host, how would you recommend going about getting these interviews? Because eventually your pipeline is going to run dry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a great question. Let's talk about where to find guests, because obviously, if you want to have a long-running show, you want to be utilizing and leveraging interviews, you need to continue to find and book great guests. And so the first thing, before I get into some actual places to find guests, I always teach that you should know what your goal is with the podcast, what you want to get out of the show. Because that determines the kind of guest that is right for your podcast. Some people, I've known business owners who they specifically are only interviewing, clients, people that they work with. So they're looking to their inner circle, which I actually think is a great strategy, because what I've noticed, majority of the guests on my podcast, Roads to Success, are people that I've worked with before, because it gives me an opportunity to deepen my relationship with those clients. And then when we have a better relationship and we connect more, they work with me longer. So it's actually can be used as a retention tool. A lot of podcasters look at their show as like, I'm going to build my audience, which definitely happens. But I think if you focus on interviewing people that you've done business with, or you're connected with in some way, you can kind of enrich those connections even more. So that's my little plug for interviewing people that you're already connected with. But then, of course, as you said, that well may run dry. You go through your whole Rolodex, but you still want to keep podcasting. So first, I want to give a couple of, free websites and resources that people are using for podcast guests. So radioguestlist.com is a great website, because you can get these emails in your inbox a couple times a week. First, they have shows that are looking for guests, so you can actually use that website as a way to pitch yourself to podcasters. But there's also people that want to be guests on podcasts, and you can, see who's trying. These are people raising their hand saying, "Hey, I want to be interviewed. This is some information." So I call that low-hanging fruit, trying to book people that are trying to be booked. So that's a great way to find guests. There's another site called podcastguest.com. Of course, there's my site. We, handpick guests for podcasters. So those are some of the services that are out there for podcast guest booking. But then think about what kind of guest you want. So if you want to interview experts, a lot of experts have written a book about their topic. So going to Amazon is a great place to start. Searching for books that have the keywords for the topic that you want to be talking about, seeing who has written a book on that. A couple things about searching for people on Amazon is I would sort your results by publishing date, because you might find an expert who wrote a book in 1995. They may or may not want to talk about that anymore. So looking at when they published their book, and then also if the publishing date is either coming up or has just happened, those authors are definitely going to want to be interviewed because they're trying to promote their book. So looking for people that are promoting their book. And the other thing is, people that are trying to promote a book, they're going to be guests that are a lot more likely to share their interview on your show, which that's kind of a whole other conversation. I don't know if you want to go there now or wait, but a lot of podcasts are like, well, how do I get my guests to share the podcast? So those are some tips on how to find guests. I'll pause, see if you...
So, I mean, that's a lot of ideas right there.
And we'll be sure to have all the links that you just gave in the show notes for everybody.
Definitely. So, I mean, when reaching here, okay, yeah, let's go there. Let's say you do get the interview. Well, let me think here. Yeah, let me step back. Before we go talk about sharing, are there any do's and don'ts when reaching out to book a guest?
Sure, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is to have it be a personalized request. So in traditional media, a lot of the, interviews are booked by way of a, press release and kind of a general like, hey, here's what this person is doing. Podcasts are so different because they are just so much more personalized. Like, podcasts are hosted by people who own that podcast. It's not like you hired somebody to host your podcast. When we pitch Michael and Teresa, we're pitching Michael and Teresa. They own this show. You guys, care a lot about who you're interviewing and what is coming out of your podcast. So that's why the request really needs to be personalized. So I follow this intro, middle, close structure to a request or a pitch. It goes both ways. So I like to introduce myself briefly and tell the guest how I found them and what I like about them, where I found them. That just gives them a sense of where are they getting exposure, because if somebody asks me to be on their podcast, I want to know just like, hey, how'd you find me? I just want to know where, how people are finding me. So tell them that, and then tell them why you want to interview them. So specifically, what topic or story do they have that you really want to share on your show? And then I give a really brief explanation of what the podcast is, like what is your show about, and then who is the target audience. And I would really, depending on your potential guest, so if this is somebody that gets interviewed a lot, I would definitely keep all of this really brief because they kind of know the drill. But for people, maybe you're trying to interview people that never go on podcasts, you might have to say, this is an internet radio show that's pre-recorded, like just so they don't get confused by any of the terminology. So just knowing your audience, and by audience, I mean the guest you're requesting, knowing who they are, what their experience is with podcast interviews, but telling them again how you found them, why you want to interview them, briefly what the show is about, who is the target audience, and then how you go about interviewing. So one of the common questions that we'll get from potential guests is, what is your schedule? What is your deadline? So that's something that people who have a lot more experience in traditional media are going to want to know, like, what is the deadline, like the press deadline? And there isn't really a deadline usually with podcast interviews, but people want to know, like, are you trying to get this recorded this week, or can we schedule it for sometime 2 months from now? So just give them a sense of when you want to be scheduling this interview. Tell them how much time it's going to take and how they can connect. So phone, Skype, audio only, video, and how much time they should block out of their day to be on the interview with you. And then the most important thing is to follow up. I mean, we book over 400 interviews a month in my company, Interview Connections, and almost all of those interviews get booked after we follow up 2 to 3 times. So that's honestly the most important thing, is just follow up. If you don't hear back, it's not because they're not interested. It just means they didn't reply and, they didn't get to it, or they didn't have time. So follow up, follow up, follow up.
And I think another thing that's important And this is something we're finding out firsthand, is how important it is to have a scheduling software like Calendly or Schedule Once, or I don't know some of the others, but I mean, it makes things so much easier when, okay, I've opened up these 2 slots each day, and if you're not available during that point, we'll have to schedule a special time with you, like we did with John Lee Dumas at 5. What was it, baby? 5:20 in the morning.
Yeah, that was fun.
Oh my gosh.
But by scheduling, it just makes things flow so much easier, and you are able to get that basic information you need as a host to do a good job as far as preparing the podcast itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I talk about this in my book, Interview Connections, and that's my biggest tip for podcast hosts who have guests is to make it really easy for their guests to schedule and be on the show. Like, I wrote an analogy in one of my first email autoresponders years ago about being a good host. It's sort of like hosting a dinner party. When you have somebody come over to your home and you're making dinner for them, you're not going to tell them, okay, and you have to bring all the ingredients, you have to bring the dessert, you have to clean the kitchen. You want to be a good host in every sense of the word. And part of that as a podcaster is to make the process of scheduling and being booked on the show as easy as possible. So you want the guest to feel like you are catering to them, and you want them to feel like they're the VIP. Whether it's a celebrity like John Lee Dumas or a nobody that you've never heard of before, you want to make them feel like they're the spotlight of that show, because that's the power of reciprocity comes in. When the guest feels like you have really made them feel like this is a great interview, you've made this a great experience, they're going to want to get back. They're going to want to help you grow your show. They're going to want to share it. They're going to want to tell people about you. So making it easy. So this, just the scheduling is one piece of that, making it easy for them. And then, saying, hey, if you don't see a time on here that works, just let me know. We can work something out, but this is what I have.
Right. So what about when after? Let's say you actually, you've gotten pretty used to the actual interview, and you've scheduled it, and you've talked to the guests, and they've just unloaded value on your podcast. What about after? What should be done? What are your top tips for getting that podcast out there afterward and encouraging the guests to do so as well?
Sure. So I call this the green room chat. So after the recording stops and you still have that guest, and you even said this, you're like, Teresa, you said, you wanted to chat with me about something. So I know there will be some green room chat, after this recording has stopped. And that happens with almost every show. There's only one show that I can think of where I did the interview and then it stopped recording and he just hung up. There was no green room chat. It was really weird, kind of awkward. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're done now. But there's almost always some green room chat, and that's really, really valuable time. Some great business deals are made in the green room chat after an interview is recorded. So what I would say is let them know, just compliment them. Assuming you thought it was a good interview, hey, that was awesome. I do a lot of interviews, just a genuine reflection of how the interview went. I have clients that'll say, the hosts are telling me I did a good job. I don't know if they're just saying that or if they really mean it. Hopefully everyone really means it, but that's definitely something I recommend. Again, it goes back to the analogy with the dinner party. When the guest is leaving your home, hey, I really enjoyed our time together. I'm really, looking forward to going out again sometime, something like that. So, and then this is actually a recommendation I give to guests, is to take the opportunity to get to know the host a little bit, because the podcaster just spent 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever asking the guest all about them. So as my tip for guest experts is to just take a moment and say, hey, what do you guys do? How can I help you? How can I support you? So that's something that I would tell to guests. But it goes both ways. If the guest is working to be a supporter of the host, and the host is really working on focusing on, how they can help the guest, everyone wins. Everyone walks away feeling happy and supported. Some specific things I would say is tell the guest when you'll be launching the interview. And while it's great to have a lot of interviews in the can, if the longer the wait is before the interview is launched, the smaller the chance is that guest will share it. So I think 2 to 3 weeks is totally reasonable. Sometimes it's longer, and that's fine. I mean, I can totally respect batch producing your content, but if you do record an interview and it's not live for 3 months, that's 3 months where that guest probably wasn't thinking about you. So the sooner you can get it launched, and then just telling them what that date is so they can mark it on their calendar, is really helpful. And so those are a couple things to do in the green room chat. And the green room chat's not always that long. It's just, 30 seconds to a couple minutes. But then staying in touch with the guest is a big part of, increasing the likelihood that they'll share it, is being a supporter of their content. If they have a podcast or a blog, sharing it, supporting them. The more you support and help the guest, the more likely they are to want to promote the show and help you too.
Right. Okay. And do you recommend, this is a little bit outside of the realm of podcasting, but do you recommend taking that content that you've done with the guests and repurposing it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I know that, Teresa, you and Michael are marketing consultants, so I'm sure this is something that you guys know a lot about. And I absolutely recommend multi-purposing your content. There's actually a lot of people that don't listen to podcasts, and there are people that don't know what a podcast is. So you definitely don't want to miss out on followers who may want to consume your content but don't have any interest in listening to you. I know, it's crazy. I assume everyone wants to listen to me. It's not the case. Some people just want to read. So I definitely recommend having good show notes. And by show notes, I don't mean like a quick teaser paragraph, but actually give all the content, all the tips, everything that was in the podcast episode, write it out. So that way, if people find you online, they're Googling around, they come to your website. Just picture this. When you're, I would guess most people at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, they have the TV on, maybe they're looking at their iPad or looking on their iPhone. I know that's often where I am. Excuse me. If I find a podcast episode and I go to their show notes page, I'm not going to listen to the show at that moment because I'm watching TV, but I will definitely read the show notes and read the content if it's something that is of interest to me. One of my podcast episodes, it's called Steps to Take to Getting Booked as a Guest Expert. It has, and I'm going to find it for you, but it has about under 300 downloads. Under 300 downloads of that episode. I went to my Libsyn page and saw that. And then on the actual show notes page, I'm going to tell you right now, because I have this little tool that tells me how many people have viewed the page. 3.5 thousand views on the show notes page, but about 300 downloads. So a lot of people just want to read and get those tips in a matter of 30 seconds. But they're not all listening. So definitely write really good blog posts that summarize all the information, all the tips, linking to your guest website, to any resources mentioned. Because, you will grow a much bigger following if you're also catering to people who prefer to read.
And if that's the case, I mean, you hear about it from Paul Colligan, from others as well. Be everywhere. Know who your market is, but be everywhere. I mean, that's, so,
Yeah, we were actually listening to a presentation by Gary V last night, Gary Vanderchuck. And he
Love
was
Gary
talking
V.
about that.
Big fan.
Oh, my goodness. Have you seen the course he did on Udemy on branding?
I've seen the Facebook ad for it. I haven't gotten the course yet.
I couldn't pass it up. I mean, $10. Can't go wrong with that.
Wow. It's only $10?
It was only $10. And normally I think it's like 100, but
wow.
It was
had to
good,
grab it.
man.
So my question is, okay, so let's say you go through the process. You've done the interview. You've repurposed your content into really good show notes. What are the next steps that you take in order to market the podcast?
Oh, such a good question. That's like the $1 million question for podcasters is how to market my podcast. Because then we're like, well, we did this show and nobody's listening. Some of my favorite podcast episodes, I put it out there. I'm like, this is the best episode I've ever produced. I can't wait to get this out there. And then like nobody listens to it, or, you're like, how do I get this out there? Okay. First thing is to utilize graphics. That's a big part of it, is that when you share a post on Twitter, on Facebook, social media, you will get a lot more hits on that. If there's a graphic attached to it, people are just really drawn to graphics. So that is one big tip, is utilize graphics. I've got a great resource for you. It's awesome. It's called Relay That. RelayThat.com is a great source. It's sort of like a Canva or a PicMonkey, but I think it's a lot. I like it. I think it's better. I've used PicMonkey. I've used Canva. I really like RelayThat because you can upload all of the elements to your graphic, and then it gives you like hundreds of different layouts. In different sizes and stuff like that. So I would definitely utilize graphics. And this is kind of all falling under social media, have a consistent social media marketing plan. So like, when are you going to share your posts? How often? Uploading. So if you're doing videos, so you could actually upload a video to Facebook with the audio from your podcast and then just have there be a still graphic. So do that. You can utilize YouTube as well. So a lot of people are on YouTube. In fact, I met somebody on the train going down to New York last weekend. He's a man from Israel. And I asked, he didn't know what a podcast was, but he actually listens to YouTube videos on his phone. And I said, so you're not watching the video? He goes, no, I'm just listening to the audio. And I was like, podcast, man. So people are on YouTube. So I would definitely have a YouTube channel and be putting your podcast on YouTube videos. Another great tool that really, when I started using this tool, my podcast audience grew a lot. Meet Edgar. So meetedgar.com, it's a social media scheduling tool that is more expensive than most, like Hootsuite and Buffer and stuff like that. It's $50 a month, but honestly, it's great because you can upload your content and then it'll consistently share it. So one trap that podcasters get in is they are sharing their new episodes every week, but then all the old ones are just collecting dust in the basement. So don't forget to share your old episodes consistently. Meet Edgar makes it really easy to do that. But remember that Meet Edgar and Buffer and Hootsuite, Facebook is going to really decrease the visibility of those posts because it's a third party. So while it is a supplement, you still want to remember and go back and share your old episodes. I would also be really active in different Facebook groups and LinkedIn forums where people are talking about your expertise. So you guys had an episode about inbound selling. So your latest episode, as we're recording this, is inbound selling. So if I were you, I would be in Facebook groups that are about marketing, about small business. And anytime you see someone ask about selling or inbound marketing, I would say, hey, we did an episode on this of our podcast. Here's the link to it. So I've done a ton of videos and podcasts and blogs. And when I'm in different Facebook groups where people are asking questions, if I have addressed their question in one of my posts, one of my podcasts, videos, or blog, I'm not going to rewrite the answer on Facebook. I'll say, hey, I actually addressed this exact question in my podcast. Here's a link to it. So that's a great way to grow your audience because you're putting it in front of people who actually are asking about that information.
Right. Now, I do like to ask this next question to pretty much all of our guests, especially, we've just hit the beginning of the year. Given your knowledge, your expertise, what are the biggest marketing trends that you or the biggest trends, period, that you see going into 2017 that we should be focusing on?
Video, actually. I think video is huge, especially with live streaming on Facebook. I think the way in which video gets out there is evolving and changing. I mean, over the last year, we've seen Blab come and go. We've seen Periscope was really popular with entrepreneurs. I think Periscope is still in existence, but it kind of fizzled out in popularity with entrepreneurs, but it's still there. Now people are on Facebook Live. in one way or another, people are really seeing the power of video, and I think that is where it's going. That's why I'm recommending people, put their podcasts on YouTube and utilize the video aspect of Facebook. Facebook loves video, so you can get your podcast content on video. Also, be promoting your podcast by putting on, turning on Facebook Live and just talking about your latest episode, and then having people go to it there. So, video is definitely what I think people are really going to. And video has always been powerful. This is nothing new. I just think that this is the big trend that people are finally starting to realize, oh, wow, yeah, this is how I'm going to grow my audience. This is how I'm going to connect with my audience and get a lot more exposure and attention.
That, you know what, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'm working on an article based on the trends that I see. I'm going to be putting it up very soon on my blog at teresablaze.com. So if you guys want to, keep an eye out for that. But I could not agree more. I just wish the video platforms would make their interfaces a little more accessible to people who can't see. Just saying.
Oh, wow. Yeah, good point.
Case in point, Snapchat, half of their interface is not accessible. But that being said, I could not agree more. I think that, and also mobile. I think especially with Google launching the mobile index apart from the desktop index, which means if you do not have your stuff optimized for mobile at all, then you will not rank, period. So, that is such a good point, Teresa. And that's why, having a podcast, people are listening to them on mobile. Almost everyone, well, over 50% of listeners are getting their podcasts on their iPhone, their iPod, their mobile device. And so if your website is not mobile friendly, you are going to lose out on a lot of people. So that is such an important point. So I think with that, Jessica, did you have any offer that you wanted to make to our audience?
Yeah, so I have just launched my book. It's called Interview Connections, How to Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic, and I am selling it for free. All you have to do is pick up a small shipping and handling fee. It's less than $7 of shipping and handling, and I will send you my hardback paper copy of my book for free. You can find it at interviewconnectionsbook.com. And if you liked the content that we talked about in today's episode, this book is definitely going to be one that you want to check out.
Well, I will definitely be checking that out. Guys, this is the kind of content we want to bring to you guys. This is the kind of stuff that we want to, bring, because I honestly believe podcasting is a medium that if you are not considering, you need to consider. And if you are considering it, look at becoming a guest on someone else's show. Seriously. And with that, Jessica, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You've rocked it. And, thank you for delivering the value. And, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You guys ask great questions and we're fantastic hosts. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome. We really enjoyed having you, for sure.
So with that, I'm Teresa.
And I'm Michael. And this is the Small Business Puzzle Podcast.
We're out. Bye.
You've been listening to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. To catch all our past shows, visit sbppodcast.com.